High-tech mercenaries with machine guns versus one old man with a wrench. Who wins? The guy who knows that 4,000 psi of pressure turns raw sewage into a cannon. This is the story of the blue-collar genius. The air down in Sector 4 was heavy, a suffocating mixture of methane, rust, and the damp, cloying scent of raw sewage. It was the kind of atmosphere that stuck to your skin and lived in your pores for days, but for Elias Miller it was just Tuesday. He stood knee-deep in gray water, his gray coveralls stained darker by years of grime, adjusting a pressure clamp on a 30-inch main. He moved with a distinct limp, a permanent reminder of a rapid depressurization accident from a life he never talked about. To his right, two apprentices, Kevin and Tyler, stood on the dry catwalk, scrolling through their phones and snickering. They were 20-something city kids who treated the job like a temporary sentence. They saw Miller as a relic, a dinosaur who didn't know how to use the digital diagnostics tablet and preferred listening to the pipes with a mechanic stethoscope. "Yo, old man," Tyler shouted over the hum of the ventilation fans. "You gonna make love to that pipe or fix it? We got a break in 20 minutes. Don't make us late." Miller didn't look up. He was focused on the vibration running through the cast iron. It wasn't right. The flow rate was erratic, pulsing in a way that suggested a blockage, but not the kind caused by grease or wet wipes. This was rhythmic, mechanical. He tapped the wrench against the metal. Clank, clank, and listened to the echo. "It's not a blockage," Miller mumbled, his voice gravelly from decades of inhaling recycled air. "What's that, Gramps?" Kevin laughed, leaning over the railing. "You forgot your hearing aid?" "I said the pressure variance is artificial," Miller said, finally looking up. His eyes were a piercing icy blue that seemed out of place in the dim sewer light. "Someone is manipulating the flow upstream, diverting the water table." The kids rolled their eyes. "Yeah, okay, Miller. Maybe the Ninja Turtles are having a party. Just tighten the bolt so we can get lunch." Miller tightened the bolt, his knuckles white. He knew that vibration. He had felt it before, miles beneath the Atlantic, when a hull was under stress from external drilling. He wasn't looking at a sewer pipe anymore. He was looking at a compromised pressure vessel. And down here, in the dark labyrinth beneath the Federal Reserve Bank's foundation, ignoring a vibration could get you killed. He wiped his hands on a rag, the hair on the back of his neck standing up. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was waiting. The explosion wasn't fiery. It was a concussive thud that sucked the air out of the tunnel for a split second. Dust and concrete particulate blasted from the north wall of the junction, covering the apprentices in a fine gray powder. Kevin dropped his phone into the sludge below as a section of the brickwork crumbled inward, revealing the jagged teeth of a diamond-tipped industrial bore. Before the boys could scream, beams of high-intensity tactical light cut through the gloom. Figures emerged from the hole. 6 of them. They weren't city workers. They wore matte black tactical gear, gas masks with voice modulators, and carried suppressed submachine guns. They moved with the precision of a paramilitary unit, fanning out to secure the chamber instantly. "Hands! On your heads! Now!" The lead intruder barked, his voice amplified and distorted. Kevin and Tyler froze, their hands trembling as they shot up into the air. Miller moved slower, deliberately showcasing his limp as he raised his hands, his wrench dangling from his pinky finger before he let it drop into the water with a splash. "Civilian contractors," one of the gunmen reported, checking a wrist-mounted computer. "Clearance level 0. They aren't supposed to be here today." The leader, a massive man whose mask bore a painted white skull, stepped onto the catwalk. He grabbed Tyler by the collar and slammed him against the railing. "You're right. You're not supposed to be here. We're drilling into the basement vault of the First National Reserve. This junction is our extraction point, and you 3 just became leverage." They dragged the terrified apprentices into the center of the platform and zip-tied their hands to the railing. The leader turned his gaze to Miller, who was still standing in the muck below. "Get up here, old man," the leader commanded. Miller waded toward the ladder, his eyes scanning the equipment the thieves were dragging through the breach. Hydraulic spreaders, thermal lances, and a portable generator. They were tapping into the city's power grid to run their heavy gear. They were smart, efficient, and lethal. But as Miller climbed the ladder, he noticed something they had missed. They were drilling directly adjacent to the main sewage diversion line, a line currently holding back 3 million gallons of the city's worst waste. Miller sat zip-tied next to the sobbing apprentices, his head bowed in apparent defeat. But beneath his hooded brow, his eyes were darting rapidly, dissecting the scene. He wasn't seeing criminals and hostages. He was seeing variables in a complex engineering problem. He watched the heavy cables snaking from the portable generator to the massive drill press they had anchored to the floor. Voltage drop, Miller thought. They're pulling 480 volts to drive that bit. The insulation on those cables is standard PVC, rated for dry conditions. This environment is 98% humidity. He looked at the drilling site. They were cutting through reinforced concrete. To cool the diamond bit, they were siphoning water from the clean utility line. But the runoff was pooling near the grate of the main sewage output valve. Miller's mind shifted gears, reverting to his training as a master chief engineer aboard the USS Nautilus. He visualized the schematics of the tunnel system. The thieves were effectively inside a pressurized tube. The junction they were in acted as a choke point for the entire district's waste management. Current pressure, 40 psi, he calculated. If I close the auxiliary relief valve and jam the solenoid on the backflow preventer, the pressure builds exponentially. Boyle's law. Volume decreases, pressure increases. He looked at the massive rusted wheel valve 10 feet away, the manual override for the Sector 4 sluice gate. If that gate opened while the pressure was critical, it wouldn't just release water. It would release a compressed slug of raw, toxic sewage moving with the force of a freight train. "Hey," Miller whispered to Kevin, whose nose was running. "Stop crying. Listen to me." "We're gonna die, Miller," Kevin whimpered. "They have guns." "Guns are just mechanical hammers," Miller whispered, his voice steady as steel. "Look at the drill. They're vibrating the floor. In about 4 minutes, that vibration is going to loosen the rust on the overhead conduit. When that happens, the lights will flicker." "So what?" "So, when the lights flicker, I'm going to move. You two stay down and keep your mouth shut. These guys understand ballistics, but they don't understand fluid dynamics. I'm about to give them a physics lesson." Miller wasn't just a plumber anymore. He was the captain of the ship, and he was about to flood the torpedo tubes. The massive diamond drill whined, a high-pitched scream that echoed off the damp walls. Just as Miller predicted, the immense torque of the machine sent tremors through the aging infrastructure. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Above them, a corroded bracket holding the main lighting conduit groaned under the vibrational stress. 3, 2, 1. Miller counted down internally. The bracket snapped. The conduit swung loose, and the overhead halogen lights flickered violently before shorting out completely. The chamber plunged into absolute darkness, save for the faint red glow of the thieves' equipment LEDs and the sparks from the drill. "Contact! Lights! Get the backups!" The leader screamed. In that split second of confusion, Miller didn't hesitate. He didn't stand up. He rolled. Despite his bad leg, he moved with the fluid grace of a man used to navigating the tight, pitch-black crawl spaces of a submarine. He slipped his wrists out of the zip tie. He had flexed his wrists when they tied him, creating just enough slack to dislocate his thumb and slide free. It was painful, a sharp pop that made him wince, but he was free. He vanished into the shadows beneath the catwalk. "Where is the old man?" one of the guards shouted, his flashlight beam cutting through the dust. "He's gone." Miller was already 20 feet away, crouching behind the generator. He didn't cut the power. That would be too obvious. Instead, he reached into his tool belt, which he'd managed to drag with him, and pulled out a heavy pipe wrench. He located the hydraulic return line for the drill's cooling system. With a grunt of exertion, he crimped the copper line, folding it over on itself until it kinked. The effect was delayed but inevitable. Without coolant, the diamond drill tip began to overheat instantly. The whine of the machine changed pitch, becoming a grinding, screeching protest. "Temperature spike!" The drill operator yelled. "The bit is seizing. Shut it down." Miller smiled in the dark. He hadn't just stopped their progress. He had forced them to engage with the machinery. He had turned their high-tech operation into a troubleshooting nightmare. Now, while they were distracted by the mechanics, he began to climb the service ladder toward the upper control deck. The hunt was on. Miller reached the upper gantry, a rusted steel walkway overlooking the main chamber. He was breathing hard, his leg throbbing, but the adrenaline focused his mind. He watched the chaos below. The thieves were furious, kicking the generator and arguing over the drill. 2 guards had been sent to sweep the perimeter, their weapon lights sweeping the dark corners. Miller needed to thin the herd. He couldn't take them in a firefight, so he had to use the environment. He scanned the upper deck. There, sitting on a pallet of supplies, was a pneumatically powered nail gun used for securing concrete forms, connected to a long, coiled air hose. Next to it was a forklift, parked and silent. Miller didn't go for the gun. He went for the forklift. He silently climbed into the cage. It was an electric model, quiet. He turned the key. The battery hummed to life. He didn't turn on the headlights. Below, one of the guards was climbing the stairs toward Miller's position. "I hear something up there," the guard radioed. Miller released the parking brake. He lined up the forklift with the top of the metal staircase. It was a heavy industrial machine, weighing nearly 4 tons. He shifted it into neutral. "Come on up," Miller whispered. As the guard's head crested the top of the stairs, Miller slammed his foot on the accelerator, driving the forklift forward. But he didn't drive it at the guard. He drove it into the stack of heavy steel pipes resting on the edge of the mezzanine. The forklift forks slammed into the pallet. The strapping snapped with a sound like a gunshot. 6 massive 10-foot cast iron pipes, each weighing 400 pounds, rolled off the edge. Crash. The noise was deafening. The pipes cascaded down the stairs like a metallic avalanche. The guard on the stairs screamed as he was knocked backward, tumbling down into the sludge below, buried under the rolling iron. The pipes continued to bounce and clang across the lower floor, smashing into the thieves' equipment crates. "Man down! Man down!" Miller slipped out of the forklift and melted back into the shadows of the upper pipes. He wasn't fighting with bullets. He was fighting with gravity and mass. And he had plenty of both. The element of surprise was gone. The leader, Vargas, was screaming orders, his voice echoing off the curved walls. "Forget the drill. Find him. Kill the old man." Bullets sparked against the steel walkway where Miller had been just seconds ago. He scrambled along the top of a massive ventilation duct, the metal vibrating against his chest. He was cornered. The facility was a maze, but they had thermal optics now. He could hear them switching modes on their goggles. "I see heat signatures up top," a mercenary shouted. Miller dropped from the duct onto a lower maintenance platform, crying out as his bad leg took the impact. He rolled behind a thick concrete pillar just as a spray of automatic fire chewed up the wall behind him. He was trapped in the wet wing, the section of the plant where the raw inflow was processed. There were 3 entry points to his position. They were closing in, moving tactically, cutting off his escape routes. Miller checked his pockets. A roll of duct tape, a lighter, and a small can of PVC primer, highly flammable. Not enough for a war, but enough for a distraction. But Miller looked past the immediate danger. He looked at the walls of the room. This was the main diversion chamber. Huge, hulking pipes ran vertically through the room, humming with the pressure of the city's waste. "Come out, old man." Vargas's voice boomed from the darkness. "You're just a plumber. You think you can stop us? We're professionals." "I'm not a plumber," Miller muttered to himself, his eyes locking onto the pressure gauges on the main manifold. The needles were steady at 60 psi. "I'm a systems engineer." He realized he was sitting right next to the atmospheric vent valve. If he opened it, it would just release gas. But if he blocked the vents, the villains were moving in, their laser sights cutting through the gloom. Miller knew he had maybe 2 minutes before they flanked him. He needed to change the battlefield. He didn't just need a weapon. He needed a biological event. He needed to turn this room into the barrel of a gun, and the sewage was the gunpowder. Miller crawled toward the control panel for the Sector 4 sluice gates. His mind raced through the equations. The system was designed for steady flow, low pressure. But liquids are non-compressible. If you take a flowing column of water, or in this case sludge, and suddenly stop it, the kinetic energy has to go somewhere. It creates a shock wave. A hydraulic transient. The water hammer effect, Miller thought. Normally, surge tanks absorbed this shock. But if he isolated the surge tanks, Miller began turning valves with frantic precision. Step 1. Isolate the expansion chambers. He spun the red wheels, locking them down. His muscles burned, but the adrenaline pushed him past the pain. Step 2. Increase velocity. He bypassed the safety governor on the inflow pumps. The hum of the pumps rose to a whine, then a roar. The pressure gauge climbed. 80 psi. 90 psi. 100 psi. The pipes around him began to groan and shudder. He's at the valves. A mercenary shouted, spotting him. A bullet pinged off the handwheel inches from Miller's face. Miller ducked, shielding his head. He had one last step. He needed to create the blockage that would trigger the hammer. He looked at the main outflow gate, a massive steel door that regulated the tunnel where the thieves were standing. He grabbed a heavy breaker bar and jammed it into the manual release mechanism of the gate, rigging it to slam shut instantly if the solenoid was tripped. "You want the vault?" Miller whispered, sweat dripping into his eyes. "You're digging into a bank. But you're standing in a latrine." He was building a bomb. Not with explosives but with physics. By shutting the gate downstream while the pumps were screaming upstream, he would create a pressure spike of over 4,000 psi in a fraction of a second. The weakest point in the system wasn't the steel pipes. It was the breached wall the thieves had drilled through. He was going to blow the sewage line directly into their tunnel. Miller grabbed the remote actuator for the gate, a heavy industrial switch wired to the column. He looked around for cover. There was a reinforced inspection booth, a small steel cage designed to protect workers from high-pressure bursts. It was 10 feet away. "Drop it." Vargas appeared on the walkway above, aiming his rifle directly at Miller's chest. Miller locked eyes with him. "You forgot to check the pressure," Miller said. He slammed the switch and dove for the cage. Clang! The massive steel gate slammed shut, instantly arresting the flow of thousands of gallons of accelerating sludge. The reaction was instantaneous. The kinetic energy of the moving liquid transformed into a massive pressure wave. The pipes screamed like dying animals. The shock wave raced back upstream, looking for an exit. It found the path of least resistance, the temporary seals and the compromised brickwork where the thieves had breached the tunnel. Boom! It wasn't an explosion of fire. It was an explosion of filth. The wall exploded outward with the force of a cannon blast. A torrent of high-velocity black water, solid waste, and concrete debris erupted into the dry tunnel where the thieves were standing. The brown tsunami hit them before they could even scream. The sheer force lifted the heavy machinery, the drill, the generator, and tossed them like toys. The mercenaries were swept off their feet, engulfed in a tidal wave of biohazardous sludge. The sound was deafening, a wet, crushing roar that shook the foundations of the building above. Inside the safety cage, Miller curled into a ball as the sludge slammed against the reinforced glass. The world outside turned pitch black and brown. The cage rattled violently, tearing at its bolts, but the submarine-grade steel held. He was in the eye of the storm, safe within the engineering he trusted, while the world outside was washed away. Silence returned slowly, broken only by the dripping of liquid and the groans of injured men. The air was thick with a smell so vile it made the eyes water instantly. Miller kicked open the door of the safety cage. The water level had receded, leaving behind a layer of slick black grime coating everything. The tunnel was a disaster zone. The thieves' high-tech equipment was buried in muck. The mercenaries were scattered like ragdolls, some groaning in pain, others retching violently, incapacitated by the sheer toxicity and force of the blast. Vargas was pinned against the far wall, trapped waist-deep in a pile of debris and sludge, his weapon lost, his skull mask cracked. He looked at Miller with horror. What are you?" Vargas gasped, coughing up water. Miller didn't answer. He limped over to the railing where Kevin and Tyler were still zip-tied. They were high enough to have avoided the main blast, but they were splattered and in shock. Miller produced a pocket knife and cut them loose. "You boys okay?" he asked softly. Kevin stared at him wide-eyed. You blew up the poop. You weaponized the poop, Miller." Sirens wailed from the surface. Blue and red lights began to flash down the ventilation shafts. The explosion had triggered the bank's seismic sensors. 10 minutes later, a SWAT team rappelled down the shaft, weapons drawn. They expected a firefight. Instead, they found a room full of defeated, vomiting terrorists and one old man wiping his wrench with a rag. The SWAT leader, followed by a police structural engineer, surveyed the scene. The engineer looked at the blown-out wall, then at the pressure gauges, then at Miller. "Jesus," the engineer whispered, lowering his flashlight. "You induced a hydraulic transient event to breach a structural firewall. You turned the city sewer into a 4,000 psi hydraulic cannon." "Just clearing a blockage," Miller said, putting his wrench back in his belt. The sun was blinding as Miller emerged from the manhole cover, limping slightly more than usual. The street was filled with police cars, ambulances, and news vans. Paramedics were loading the handcuffed, sludge-covered thieves into ambulances, wearing hazmat suits to handle them. Miller walked past the cameras, ignoring the reporters shouting questions. He just wanted a shower and a cold beer. Kevin and Tyler ran up behind him. They looked different now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a jittery reverence. "Miller." "Hey, Miller." Tyler shouted. Miller stopped and turned. "Go home, kids. Wash your uniforms. Twice." "Miller," Kevin said, stepping forward. Who are you? Really?" Miller adjusted his cap. "I'm the guy who keeps the pipes running. Same as tomorrow." He turned and walked away, his silhouette framed by the flashing lights. As he disappeared into the crowd, the camera panned back to the young apprentices. "I'm never making fun of a plumber again," Tyler whispered. "No way," Kevin agreed. "That guy isn't a plumber. He's a wizard." Miller didn't need the credit. He didn't need the fame. He knew the truth. The city was a machine and he was the mechanic. And as long as the water flowed, he was the most dangerous man underground. The end.